What's up, everybody? Over the last couple of weeks, I've been posting a ton of content around different types of training splits, movement patterns, compound lifts, and how your program should be based on movement patterns and compound lifts, and not dominated by isolation exercises. And with all of that content came with it made me realize something. And what it made me realize was there's a ton of misconceptions around what compound lifts even are. For some reason, when people hear compound lifts, they automatically think barbell squat, bench, and deadlift. And that's probably the biggest misconception. We'll get into that, but we're also going to get into a couple more misconceptions because I think it's really important for people to understand these terms and what they mean and how to utilize them, because no matter your goal, whether you want to lose fat, you want to build muscle, you want to get stronger, you want to prepare for a 5K, you want to eventually do a high rocks, any of those things, your program is going to be built around compound lifts. But when you have the false belief that compound lifts are only barbell squat, bench, and deadlift, you may feel like a post online doesn't apply to you. And you may be one of those people that get defensive and comment, "Oh, I'm doing this and it works for me, it works for my body." It's it's not about any of that, right? What it is about is truly understanding these movements so that you can have the most effective program, because the reality is compound lifts are literally just movements that you do in your day-to-day anyways, right? So we're talking squat patterns, hinge, pushing exercises, pulling exercises, anything that engages your core. So just because you're not barbell squatting does not mean that you're not doing a compound exercise. I've had tons of people comment on my stuff like, "Oh, I don't do barbell squats, deadlifts, or bench press. I do split squats, and RDLs." Those are still compound lifts, right? We're going to be doing these exercises no matter what your goal is. What makes the difference is how you apply those exercises with specific training variables. So if you look at a program that's designed for somebody who's about to run a marathon and they're still strength training, and you look at a program for somebody who is doing powerlifting, the exercises they're doing are going to be relatively the same, but what is going to be different is for a powerlifter, they're going to be lifting heavier, right? Because the goal of powerlifting is to maximize how much force you could produce in one rep on squat, bench, and deadlift, right? So they're going to be doing more barbell squats, benching, and deadlift. But as a runner, you still need to have a strong lower body, a strong core. You're going to be doing some form of a squat, some form of a single leg movement, because when you run, you are literally loading your lower limb every time you take a step, take a stride. So if you can build a stronger lower body, it's going to benefit you in running. So their program is still going to include those things, but it's going to be more endurance based, right? So you may be doing higher reps. You're not going to be going as heavy, but the movements are still the same. It's more so how you apply those things. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. People love to say, but that's not my goal. I don't want to lift heavy. That just because you do a compound lift doesn't mean you're lifting heavy. It just means that you're training a movement that requires you to use multiple major muscle groups at one time. That's literally it. So if you are doing any form of a squat, which also includes leg press, if you are doing any form of a hinge, whether it's a hip thrust, a RDL, a deadlift, if you are doing a push-up, a bench press on a barbell, dumbbell machine, a shoulder press, if you're doing any type of pulling movement, whether you're pulling something towards your body, like a lat pull down, a row, or you're pulling your body towards something like a pull-up or a chin-up, that is a compound lift. And if you look at majority of programs, I think it's so funny when people talk about their programs don't have compounds. When you look at programs, they are really primarily compounds, and then you fill it in with isolation lifts. You're not doing just all isolation exercises. And the way I like to explain it to people is, what would be more beneficial if you did let's say for upper body, if you did bench press as opposed to just lateral raises. Bench press uses your chest, your triceps, and your shoulders, while lateral raises just uses your deltoids. You're going to get more out of the exercise that uses more muscle groups. Like, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science at all. Same thing. If you had a big project to do, if you had one worker versus 10 workers, who's going to get more work done? One person doing the work or 10 people contributing to the work? 10 people are going to get the work done, right? So it's literally not rocket science. I think it's insane when people try to argue this, but I do think that they're just arguing from a place of misunderstanding and not having the whole context on what a compound is. There's just so much, I don't even know, like so much hate towards the word compound. And there's a lot of misconceptions that are around the word compound that people get so upset when we talk about this. And I understand sometimes my content may strike a nerve, but once you see through all of that and kind of get over your feelings and actually try to view it from a learning perspective, I think that it can actually help your training. Second biggest misconception that I didn't even realize was a misconception until this week. Beginners should start with isolation exercises. So a lot of people think that beginners need to do a whole bunch of like bicep curls and lateral raises and smaller exercises so that they can feel the muscle more. But the reality is, if you only do isolation exercises for an entire year, when you go to do compound exercises, you are still going to be a beginner when it comes to compound exercises. So there's no way to like prepare your body for a compound exercise besides just scaling it to your current ability. So what I mean by that is, you may be a beginner, you may not be comfortable or even ready to barbell squat, right? Does that mean you don't squat? No, that means you find a squat variation that works for where you are now. Not everybody needs to go in the gym and put a heavy ass barbell on their back. That's not what compound means. Compound literally just means it's multiple major muscle groups. That's literally it. So just because you're a beginner on day one, if a goblet squat is easy for you, if you can properly barbell back squat or front squat with good form, you don't need to load the bar very heavy, but you can still do a compound lift and work from there. Just because you spend time, months doing isolation exercises does not guarantee your ability to go and do a compound lift. At some point, you got to start, and it does not take years to start compound lifts. And that's a big misconception. That's what keeps people from making the progress they want to make, because they spend so much time doing stuff that doesn't give them the biggest bang for their buck, especially on limited time. If you're training 3-4 times a week, you need to be doing mainly compounds. If you're training every day, then you have more frequency, more days per week where you can actually spread out your training a little bit better, include more isolation. But for majority of the people in the world, we are not working out 7 days a week, yet we still want to be efficient with what we're doing. Another misconception, I'm probably going to break this into 2 lives because I got a client in a few. So I'm going to do one more misconception, then I'm going to hop on later. But another misconception is you need to feel the muscle working for it to be effective. And the reality is, you don't need to feel the muscle working for it to truly be working. Muscles have certain actions. When people say, "Oh, when I do a RDL, my quads take over. I only feel my quads," then there has to be an error in your form, because when you think about it, your quadriceps, they help to extend your knee, so straighten your knee, right? So your RDLs are likely being done with more knee flexion. So you're likely bending your knee a lot more than you need to, so that you're feeling your quads, because you're bending your knees too much, more so squatting your RDLs, and your quads are having to bring you out of that motion, as opposed to if you do a hinge movement correctly, it's very minimal knee bend unless you're doing it more glute bias, but still then you're not supposed to be feeling your quads. And when people say this and then we look at them actually do a hinge movement, they're not actually engaging their glutes and their hamstrings, because they're not extending their hips, right? So it really just comes down to performing movements correctly and making sure that your form is good so that you can actually utilize the muscles you need to be utilizing. But if you're doing the exercise wrong, like you're squatting your RDL instead of truly hinging at your hips, obviously you're going to feel your quads more, because you're doing it in a more quad dominant way. And the RDL and a hinge is not knee biased at all. It's not quad dominant at all. So if you actually focused on training movements correctly and not feeling something, then you'll get a lot more out of your training. Everybody loves to feel the burn and do a ton of like burnout exercises. Glute kickbacks is an example for women. Women love to feel their glutes. They may say, hey, I don't feel my glutes during a barbell squat. That doesn't mean that your glutes aren't working. You literally cannot get out of the bottom of a squat without your glutes. It does not matter whether you feel it during the moment or not. So once you start to actually break down your movement and make sure you're doing it correctly, you'll get a lot more out of your training as opposed to just doing a ton of activation and isolation exercises that obviously make you feel a burn more than something that is not as isolated and uses a lot of big muscle groups. Like you're going to feel your glutes a lot more doing a cable kickback than a barbell squat because a cable kickback is only using your glute muscle. You ain't got nothing else to feel. But in a barbell squat, you're using your hamstrings, your glutes, your quads, your core, your back stabilizers. All that work is distributed throughout so many muscle groups that you're likely going to feel it where you're weakest, right? You're going to feel your quads because you're bending down, going into deep knee flexion, deep knee bending, and you're coming out of that position. But in order to actually bring your hips up, you got to use your glutes. But that work is spread out a lot more evenly throughout all muscle groups as opposed to if you're doing a glute kickback, you're only going to feel your glutes. So there's a lot of misconceptions around what you should be feeling and what you should be doing around training. And the reality is, no matter how you feel, there's certain principles that are tried and true. And I get everybody is different, but that does not negate that the principles need to be applied to the person. Just because you are different does not mean that the principles change. That just means how you utilize the principles need to be different for you, but they do not change. And that is the biggest thing I hear all the time when somebody is critiqued or somebody asks for advice. Like they're like, hey, it works for me. Okay, it works for you, but that doesn't make the principle like invalid. So I think that if we can actually start training based on simply movement patterns, getting more out of what we're doing in the gym, we'd all be healthier as a society. A lot of people will get to their fitness goals a lot quicker. And that's going to take a little bit more effort on everybody's part. A lot more effort on people who are posting content to actually give context and not just post blanket statements without anything to back it up. And then also as a consumer, you have to have discernment. You have to know like, hey, this 30-second clip is only giving me a small glimpse to what I need. And you need to either go do your research on your own, which is going to take time, or you need to have a coach that's going to break that down for you. So I think it comes from both sides of the coin. And if we can all put our efforts into doing that, I think a lot of the shit we see on social media that leads people astray, leads people the wrong way, will start to kind of change and actually give people the confidence to step in the gym and be effective as opposed to stepping in the gym, not knowing what you're doing. Now you're wasting time. Yes, sure, it's great that you are in the gym getting some movement in, but if you're on my page, if you're here, we are not about just doing the bare minimum. We want to be getting the gym consistently. We want to train hard. We want to be effective as possible because that's the type of people we are. We're not just showing up to show up. If that's you, if you're the type of person who's going to comment on a post and say, well, something is better than nothing, please unfollow me because that is not what we're here to do. I'm going to hop back on in a few hours and address the other misconceptions, but I wanted to give you guys those three because those were the biggest ones. There's a ton more, but I'll leave you with those and I'll be back in a couple hours to dispel the other myths. Peace.